In 1972, a covert recovery unit vanished somewhere in the cold expanse of Eastern Europe. Their objective was simple: locate a downed research aircraft transmitting strange biological readings before it went dark. But when the team reached the crash site, they found the snow untouched, except for a single spiral carved into the ice, still warm to the touch. The signal was no longer coming from the wreck, it was coming from beneath it. As they dug deeper, their equipment began to fail. Compasses spun in circles, radios spoke back in delayed whispers, and the ground pulsed like it had a heartbeat. Beneath layers of permafrost, they uncovered a chamber, vast, metallic, and alive with a faint hum. Inside, something was waiting, not fossil, not machine, not human. The mission log ended there, the transmission cutting off mid-breath. Weeks later, locals near the Carpathian border reported hearing voices through the snow. Words carried on the wind, spoken in tones no language could name. The incident was buried under the codename EGEASA, sealed away as a biological anomaly. But every few decades, when the ice shifts and the earth groans, the signal returns, not as static, but as a call. Something beneath the world remembers, and it's learning to speak again. The first sign came as a flicker on a Soviet surveillance monitor, a pulse buried in the static of deep winter radio. The reading was faint, too rhythmic for natural interference, too structured to be geological. When American intelligence intercepted the signal, they classified it under a provisional tag, EGEASA. No known language, no coordinates, no source. Just a repeating frequency that seemed to breathe. Within days, a covert task force was assembled under the guise of meteorological recovery. What they didn't know was that the weather station they were sent to find hadn't transmitted in over a decade. The flight to the drop zone crossed a stretch of wilderness untouched by maps. As the helicopter descended through the blizzard, the snow seemed to fall in slow motion, almost suspended mid-air. The pilot reported interference, instruments flickering to life and death in erratic rhythm. Below them, the forest looked scorched, circular, as if lightning had struck in perfect geometry. When they landed, there was no wreckage, no tracks, only snow pressed down into smooth spirals that radiated outward like ripples in frozen water. The team's radios crackled once, then went dead. Sergeant Corwin, the unit's communications officer, logged the first anomaly 3 hours after landing. The snow emitted heat signatures. Patches of it glowed faintly under infrared lenses, alive with slow rhythmic pulses. The geologist claimed it was geothermal activity, but the patterns were too precise, each pulse synchronized like a heartbeat. The men followed it to the edge of a ridge where a series of metal rods jutted from the ice, their surfaces etched with markings that moved when viewed directly. No one spoke. The air felt thinner, as if the mountain itself were inhaling. When night fell, the signal returned, louder and closer. The team's instruments recorded a sound that wasn't quite mechanical and not entirely organic, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to come from beneath them. They set up camp above the largest heat signature, unaware that it wasn't a vent or a cavern, but something built. The medic swore he could hear whispering in the wind, like faint syllables carried on the snow. By midnight, the temperature had risen 10 degrees, but the cold still clung to their bones. The snow under their tents trembled once, then stilled. The following morning, one of the men discovered something impossible. The prints from their boots, every one of them, had been filled in overnight, smoothed perfectly flat. Yet new prints led away from camp, deeper into the ridge, made by something barefoot and heavy. The tracks ended at a sheer wall of ice. Embedded within it, several meters down, glowed what looked like a metallic shape, pulsating with dim orange light. They tried to chip through the wall, but every strike echoed back twice, as if the ice was responding. Hours passed before they realized the echo wasn't sound. It was imitation. Every time they struck, the shape inside would flare brighter, and the pulse of heat beneath them would accelerate. The geologist dropped his pickaxe when the wall began to hum, a vibration so deep it rattled their teeth. The snow melted around their boots in perfect circles. Then, without warning, the hum stopped. The mountain exhaled, and every compass spun north at once. From the ice, a single tone emerged, a sustained, harmonic note that resonated in the chest rather than the ear. They recorded the sound on analog tape, though it barely registered as audio. The waveform was erratic, unpredictable, resembling heartbeats layered with distortion. When slowed down, it produced fragments of speech, low, drawn-out phonemes that seemed to form the word return. The linguist accompanying them dismissed it as interference, but later that night he found the word carved into the snow outside his tent in perfect symmetry. There were no footprints nearby. By the fourth day, the mountain's silence had grown suffocating. The wind had stopped entirely. Radio silence had become absolute. When they tried to use their flare guns, the ignition fizzled, chemical dampening, as if the air refused to burn. Beneath their feet, a constant vibration persisted, subtle but growing. They decided to descend before conditions worsened. But when they packed, one crate, a lead-shielded data container, was missing. In its place, the snow formed a hollow cavity, perfectly circular, still warm. Corwin was the first to notice it. Faint radio chatter returning through the static. Not their voices, other ones. The transmission contained fragments of their last log entries, spliced together and repeated out of order, their own words speaking back to them. The team fell silent as the radio whispered coordinates they hadn't transmitted. The linguist translated the final line. "You are inside the origin." Before anyone could respond, the ground gave a single deep lurch, like the mountain's heart had skipped a beat. They followed the new coordinates uphill, toward a narrow fissure splitting the ice like a wound. Inside, faint light pulsed in a steady rhythm, illuminating walls lined with crystalline material, transparent, yet constantly shifting, like frozen mercury. The air felt alive. Every breath vibrated through their lungs. At the fissure's end stood a metal slab, buried half in snow, marked with the same moving symbols they'd seen before. They touched it, and for the first time, the sound stopped completely. In that silence, the geologist's voice broke the air. "It's listening." Then, the snow beneath their feet cracked, not from weight, but from something pushing upward. The ground split into lines of light, spreading outward in a pattern that looked like circuitry. Beneath it, something massive stirred. The mountain trembled again, and the team stumbled backward as fissures widened, exposing a metallic surface that reflected no light. It wasn't a cave, it was a door. The sergeant tried to radio command again, but only a low hum answered, identical to the one they'd recorded. The metal surface beneath them began to shift, panels sliding like muscle beneath skin. The snow melted entirely within minutes, revealing a black chamber that extended into impossible depth. It wasn't carved or built in any way they understood. It grew, and from its center came a steady pulse, like breath through stone. When one of the men shone a flashlight downward, the beam disappeared into fog, swallowed instantly. But seconds later, a faint red glow rose from the dark, pulsing in rhythm with their heart monitors. The medic whispered that it felt like the light was syncing with them, beating in time. "It's scanning us," he muttered. "It's learning." Then the glow intensified until it bathed the entire fissure in deep crimson. The linguist's recorder captured a single sentence before cutting out, "The snow remembers." No one spoke after that. They backed away, but the ground didn't stop shaking. The air was thick with low-frequency sound, and in every direction the snow shifted, forming small, human-shaped mounds that began to rise. Within seconds, the entire ridge seemed alive with motion. The sergeant shouted for retreat, but his voice came back doubled, his own echo speaking a half-second late, saying the same words in a different tone. As they climbed back toward the surface, the fissure sealed itself with a rush of air that sounded eerily like a sigh. By the time they reached the camp, the snow had stopped glowing. Everything, the tents, the gear, even the tracks, was gone. Only the radio remained, half buried in the frost, still broadcasting the same frequency, the one they'd come to investigate. But now, when they played it back, there was no static, only the sound of breathing, slow and steady, matching their own. Long after the mission was declared lost, satellites continued to pick up that same rhythmic pulse from the same coordinates. The tone never changed. It was neither Morse, language, nor interference. Just a steady signal beneath the ice, waiting, patient, alive. Those who analyzed it later would give it a name, the one whispered in classified rooms for decades to come, EGEASA. The chamber wasn't supposed to exist. The maps showed only solid rock beneath that ridge, yet the ice had cracked open to reveal smooth metallic walls stretching far below the surface. They were cold to the touch, but not with natural frost. This cold pulsed, like a breath held too long. The soldiers lowered a probe into the fissure and heard it, an echo returning, not seconds later, but hours. It came back distorted, carrying sounds no one had made. Something below was listening and answering. Descending into the darkness, the light from their flares seemed to bend, drawn toward the walls. The steel surface rippled faintly as heat from their lamps brushed against it, responding almost like skin. The air grew thick, heavy with static, every exhale visible as fine mist even though the temperature was rising. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, out of sync, slower, as though the sound was taking a different path and returning changed. No one spoke after that. The silence of the place felt deliberate. Corwin activated the seismic scanner, but the readings made no sense. The machine displayed waveforms forming geometric patterns, triangles, spirals, then shapes that couldn't exist in normal physics. Beneath the ice, something vast was moving, but not through space, through sound. The corporal swore he felt the vibrations running through his bones, aligning with his heartbeat. The deeper they went, the more the echoes began to mimic them. Every sound mirrored by a tone that didn't match any known resonance. At 300 feet down, they reached a level surface. The chamber's ceiling was lined with hexagonal plates, each one covered in thin frost. In the center, a metallic column rose from the floor, covered in markings that shifted when looked at directly. The linguist thought they were letters. The biologist insisted they were organic, like cells splitting under glass. When they approached, the hum that had followed them stopped completely, replaced by a silence so dense it pressed against their eardrums. Then, faintly, the metal began to move. Not bending or breaking, breathing. The plates along the wall flexed outward, releasing a cloud of frozen vapor. The sound that followed was soft, harmonic, almost melodic. It wasn't random. The biologist whispered that it was forming frequency patterns identical to human vocal cords. The machine beneath the ice was trying to speak. They recorded the tones, sending them back through the analyzer. What came out of the speaker made every man take a step back. The audio wasn't mechanical. It was voices, overlapping in low, distorted unison, repeating words that none of them had said aloud. The linguist froze, whispering, "Those are our names." The machine had taken their introductions from earlier transmissions and was now repeating them perfectly, matching tone, cadence, and emotion. The corporal slammed the recorder off, demanding they leave. But before they could, the ground trembled and the walls began to pulse in rhythm with a deep, bass-like beat. The column in the center split open down the middle, revealing what looked like a smooth, glassy core that shimmered with faint red light. Every man in the room felt it inside their chest. Their heart rates began to synchronize with the pulse. The medic yelled that their monitors were mirroring the same pattern. The metal was sinking to them. They backed away as the core brightened, flooding the chamber with pale crimson light. The biologist shouted that the structure was resonating at a frequency identical to neural activity, somehow reading them. The linguist knelt, clutching his head, muttering that the words weren't sound at all. They were data layered across pitch and pulse, speaking directly to the brain. "It's trying to remember us," he whispered. "It's copying." For a moment it seemed to stop. The light dimmed and the room fell still again. Then slowly, a new sound began, faint footsteps. But they weren't coming from the corridor they entered. They were coming from behind the column. Everyone turned their lights toward it, but nothing was there. The sound continued, growing louder, deliberate, paced like human movement. And then came the whisper, a perfect imitation of the sergeant's own voice saying, "We're not alone." The team froze. Corwin shouted into his mic, demanding a response from command. But the radio emitted only a single tone, flat, continuous, heart-like. The linguist's head jerked toward it. "It's matching us again," he said quietly. "Every sound we make, it's rewriting it." He switched off his recorder, but it continued blinking, recording nothing and everything at once. The pulse quickened, the chamber vibrated. As they prepared to retreat, the steel floor cracked underfoot. Not with a fracture, but with sound. A deep metallic groan echoed through the structure, resonating up through their boots. Each vibration carried shape, lines and curves that appeared in the frost on their visors. The biologist scraped a sample with trembling fingers. Under light, the frost revealed microscopic crystalline patterns that rearranged themselves like sentences being rewritten. The structure wasn't decaying, it was thinking. Then, in an instant, the hum returned, louder than before. The air shimmered, and the reflections of the team on the walls began to move independently. Each reflection lagged by seconds, performing actions before the men themselves did. When one soldier raised his rifle, his mirrored double smiled. The medic screamed, firing a shot, and the bullet struck the wall, only to vanish mid-air, absorbed into the steel like a ripple through water. The impact sent waves of energy across the room, distorting everything around them. The walls darkened, swallowing the light. A faint voice emerged, layered, fragmented, impossible to trace. It spoke in cadence, using broken fragments of English mixed with something ancient and indecipherable. Origin within. Remember, the linguist began to weep, his mind breaking under the pattern. It's speaking to the echoes, he gasped. We're the reflection, not them. The floor split open, revealing an endless shaft below, faintly glowing with pulsing veins of light that twisted like neural tissue. The red glow deepened, turning the air crimson. The sergeant barked orders, pulling the men back toward the rope line. But as they ascended, the echoes continued climbing with them, disembodied, distorted footsteps following in perfect rhythm. The metal beneath their boots flexed like living flesh. At the top of the fissure, daylight never looked so alien. The snowstorm outside was gone, replaced by a clear horizon painted in dull grey. Behind them, the mountain's ridge sealed shut, erasing every trace of the passage. The linguist collapsed in the snow, whispering through frozen lips. It's awake now, the echoes loose. Corwin retrieved the recorder from his pocket, but it was still running, recording no sound, just the faint pulse of something beneath the static. Back at base, the recovered audio was analyzed for months. Beneath the noise lay subharmonic layers that formed structured data, maps, phrases, and repeating tones resembling biological waveforms. The scientists tried to decode it until one researcher realized it was structured exactly like human EEG patterns. Whatever was beneath that mountain wasn't transmitting, it was alive. And worse, it had learned the rhythm of human thought. When the report was finally sealed, it carried a single annotation scrawled in red at the bottom of the final page. The echoes are not reflections, they are rehearsals. No one who went into the fissure ever returned, but satellite sensors still detect faint metallic frequencies from that same ridge, an unending pulse buried beneath the frozen steel, repeating every 7 hours, perfectly aligned with the human heartbeat. The descent into the second chamber was unlike the first. There were no ladders, no defined walls, just a smooth, metallic slope that seemed to shape itself to their steps. As the men descended, their headlamps reflected hundreds of tiny points of light embedded in the steel, blinking like distant stars. At first, they assumed they were reflections of their lamps. Then the pattern began to change. The lights pulsed in rhythm with their breathing. When they stopped to listen, the glow dimmed, waiting, like something alive learning their pace. Sergeant Corwin radioed up to the surface team, but static swallowed his voice. He tried again, lowering his tone, and the lights nearest his boots flickered in sync with every syllable. The linguist leaned in close, whispering, "It's responding to language." He spoke a single word, "Hello," and the floor beneath them lit up in a wave, spreading outward in a perfect spiral. The pattern climbed the walls, curling upward until it vanished into the dark above, as if the chamber itself had inhaled their greeting. The biologist knelt and pressed his gloved hand to the surface. The lights gathered beneath his palm, swirling in fractal lines that coiled into something resembling neural tissue. "It's mapping touch," he whispered. "It's copying sensation." But before he could pull away, the light changed color, amber to red, then a deep ultraviolet. The glow crept up his arm through the fabric, leaving frost-like marks in its wake. He yanked his hand back, gasping as the glow dimmed again, receding as if satisfied. Deeper in the chamber, the lights began to move faster. They formed currents beneath the steel, like rivers of electricity. Each pulse traced strange geometric patterns, circles within circles, shapes that folded into themselves like origami. The linguist began sketching them, realizing the forms weren't random. They repeated in intervals, mathematically perfect, recursive. "This isn't decoration," he said quietly. "This is communication. It's asterisk thinking in geometry." The medic, trembling, muttered that the air smelled of ozone now, like a thunderstorm under the ground. The static on their radios wasn't static anymore. It was rhythm, faint but constant. The sound lined up perfectly with the shifting light. Every pulse of color created a tone, each one layered until the air itself vibrated. "It's making a sentence," the linguist whispered. "A language without words, frequency instead of breath." Corwin ordered a retreat back up the slope, but the path behind them had changed. The walls they'd descended along were no longer visible, replaced by a smooth curve of mirrored metal. Their reflections stood still while they moved. One soldier threw a flare behind him, and it froze mid-air, suspended in the light, as if time had been slowed around it. The chamber didn't trap them with walls. It trapped them with perception. Then, suddenly, the lights gathered at the far end of the room, condensing into a cluster the size of a human heart. It pulsed steadily, faster with every breath they took, until it began to mirror each man's rhythm separately, 4 patterns overlapping like an orchestra of life signs. The medic's monitor beeped erratically, as if syncing to it. He ripped the device off, panicking. "It's inside the frequency of our bodies," he shouted. "It's learning our biology." The linguist raised his voice, calling out the same phrase he'd recorded earlier, one of the words the signal had broadcast before they entered. The lights stopped. For one long second, the entire room went still. Then, slowly, the glow surged forward, not toward the linguist, but around him, forming a halo of light that twisted like smoke in zero gravity. Within the pattern, faint images appeared, faces, machines, landscapes that flickered too quickly to focus on. It was showing them something. The visions lasted only seconds, but every man saw something different. One saw endless corridors of bone-white metal filled with liquid light. Another saw a field of sky where stars hung motionless, orbiting nothing. The linguist saw himself, standing exactly where he was, but older, his face half covered in frost. The entity wasn't sharing images, it was showing memory, not theirs, its own. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the floor and into their skulls. The lights responded instantly, forming a web of energy across the walls. The linguist fell to his knees, clutching his ears. "It's inside the sound spectrum," he gasped. "It's bypassing the brain. It's talking through thought." The medic tried to pull him up, but his hands passed through a layer of light that clung like mist, humming softly as it reacted to their movement. The glow spread faster, crawling up the walls like veins under glass. Each pulse brought warmth and light, and something else. Their shadows began to move differently, detaching from their bodies, shifting with independent rhythm. One shadow stepped forward, freezing in a distorted outline of the soldier it belonged to. Then it smiled, a faint curl of darkness against steel, and vanished in the next flash. As panic broke, the sergeant fired a warning shot into the air. The sound exploded, but the bullet never fell. It hung suspended, encased in light, rotating slowly before dissolving into static. The echo from the gunshot didn't fade. It multiplied, repeating itself in layers, each one quieter but clearer, until the final echo came back in a voice. "Stay." The tone was calm, human, too human. Corwin shouted for the rope line, but it was gone. The slope they'd entered through was sealed by a veil of light that rippled like a liquid mirror. Every attempt to touch it resulted in instant distortion. Their hands blurred and fragmented before reappearing intact. It wasn't blocking them physically. It was altering time itself. The biologist whispered, "It's studying cause and effect. It's learning choice." The linguist crawled toward the center of the floor, where the first cluster of lights still hovered. "It's communicating through cognition," he said weakly. "Not sound, not image, thought." He extended his hand toward it. The light responded instantly, wrapping around his palm. His eyes widened, then went blank. The lights pulsed once more, brighter than before, then receded. The linguist collapsed, breathing but unresponsive, his pulse mirroring the rhythm of the chamber. The lights dimmed gradually after that, returning to stillness. The metallic floor cooled. The air grew quiet again. When they carried the linguist out, he murmured faint words under his breath, looping endlessly. The light wasn't light, it was memory. No one spoke for the rest of the ascent. Above ground, the storm had returned, but the snow now glowed faintly where they stepped, each footprint lighting briefly before fading. The phenomenon continued for hours after their departure. In later analysis, scientists found that the recording equipment had captured bursts of gamma radiation aligned with neural wave patterns, evidence that thought had been converted into energy. But the last few seconds of footage showed something none of them could explain. A single light lingering in the snow long after the team left. It pulsed slowly, then moved across the landscape, changing direction, stopping briefly, almost as if deciding where to go next. The report concluded with one line: "The lights did not follow them. They learned how to leave." The deeper they went, the more it sounded alive. The air was thick with low vibrations that pressed into their lungs like weight. And each step they took echoed longer than it should have, stretching into a hum that refused to fade. Corwin kept one hand on the wall for balance, and it pulsed beneath his glove, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of something enormous sleeping far below. They weren't in a cavern, they were inside something that remembered sound. When they reached the bottom, the steel gave way to a circular chamber of black stone fused with metal veins. In the center stood a vertical column of translucent material, glowing faintly from within. The linguist approached first, noting how every movement sent ripples through the floor, and those ripples traveled up the column like signals. Then the voices started, soft at first, overlapping whispers in tones that sounded painfully human, but with words that made no sense. The sound wasn't coming from around them. It was rising through them. The medic covered his ears, shaking his head. "It's not outside," he said, through clenched teeth. "It's inside the frequency. Our skulls are amplifying it." The linguist activated his recorder, only to find it already running, though no one had touched it. On playback, the device didn't echo their voices. It played entirely new ones. They were slow, layered, and speaking in a language that carried both harmony and pain. Each syllable felt like a vibration through bone. Then the translator's microphone picked up something familiar, his own voice among them, whispering back the words he hadn't yet said. He dropped the mic in shock. Corwin ordered silence, but the echoes ignored them, speaking louder until one phrase emerged clearly in English. "The hollow remembers its makers." For a long moment, no one breathed. The linguist's flashlight flickered, and the glow inside the column pulsed in perfect time with the beam. Corwin demanded an explanation. The linguist could only mutter, "It's resonant mimicry. It's repeating what it hears, like sonar with memory." But even as he spoke, the voice returned, distorted but unmistakable, like memory. The entity wasn't just copying sound. It was listening, testing, understanding context. The biologist stepped closer to the column, running a scanner along its surface, and froze as readings spiked off the charts. There were no biological materials, only electrical impulses identical to brainwaves. The voices grew louder. They weren't whispers anymore, they were asterisk choruses. Dozens of tones harmonizing, modulating, building into something structured. The team's headsets crackled to life, carrying fragments of radio chatter from earlier transmissions, phrases they themselves had spoken days ago, replayed out of order, layered with strange harmonics. "How is it doing that?" Corwin shouted, but his voice overlapped instantly with a perfect copy repeating the same question a beat later. The linguist knelt, scribbling notes even as his hands trembled. "It's replaying consciousness," he whispered. "It's not recording, it's remembering us in real time." The medic laughed nervously, muttering that the place was an echo chamber built by the earth itself. But the laughter stopped when the chorus shifted into something deeper. The words changed shape, transforming into rhythmic phrases that resembled a heartbeat turned into language. Suddenly, the chamber lights dimmed. The glow from the core brightened until it illuminated their shadows against the walls, shadows that began to move on their own. They stepped out of sync, each performing gestures a second too late or too early, and the voices matched their motion, speaking words that made their names sound alien. The biologist screamed as his own shadow turned toward him, whispering in his voice, "Below is the shape of thought." Corwin fired into the air, but the gun's echo came back before the muzzle flash died. The reversed sound hit them with a physical force, knocking two men to the ground. When the echo stopped, the chamber fell silent again. Then a faint metallic scrape echoed upward from the core, like something large dragging its fingers across the inside of the world. The lights flared once, then dimmed to a heartbeat rhythm. The linguist switched his recorder to playback mode. What came through wasn't noise, it was speech. The voices overlapped perfectly to form coherent sentences. The surface breaks. The hollow breathes. The origin still moves. Corwin's face went pale. The linguist murmured, "It's referring to itself. It's describing life." But as he spoke, his own voice joined the recording, seamlessly blending with the others. The medic tried to turn off his equipment, but his wrist light blinked in response, projecting flickering lines across the floor, lines that formed words in shifting patterns. "You are the echo." The walls began to hum again, deeper this time, like the inside of a cathedral carved from machinery. The air filled with metallic dust that shimmered under their lamps, each grain vibrating in rhythm with the unseen pulse. One of the soldiers dropped his weapon and pressed his ear to the floor. His eyes went wide. "It's not below us," he said softly. "It's around us." The ground beneath them flexed slightly, as if something huge was expanding outward. The column in the center cracked open with a hiss of vapor, revealing a hollow interior glowing white. The voices converged into a single tone, low, calm, resonant enough to make their hearts skip in unison. The linguist stepped forward, mesmerized. "It's speaking through frequency," he said. "Each sound carries emotion, not meaning." He reached toward the column, and the light within extended outward, touching his hand. For a moment, everything went silent. Then the entity asterisk spoke again, but this time, not aloud. Every man heard the same phrase inside his head. "You are pieces of our thought." They stumbled back, weapons raised, but there was no aggression in the tone, only observation. The light dimmed again, and the column began to sink, folding into the floor like melting glass. As it disappeared, the walls rippled with faint imagery, human silhouettes, soldiers, explorers, scientists, dozens of them, each vanishing into the core. They weren't ghosts. They were memories of those who came before. When the silence finally returned, Corwin looked around and realized something terrifying. There were no more echoes, no footsteps, no sound except their breathing. The chamber wasn't resonating anymore, it was listening in stillness. Whatever lived beneath the steel had stopped speaking aloud. It no longer needed to. It had learned them. By the time they climbed back toward the surface, the mountain had changed again. The snow glowed faintly blue, pulsing in the same pattern as the voice's final tone. Hours later, the radio came back online, replaying a single clear message in the linguist's voice. "The core is not beneath. It's within." Command dismissed it as interference, but those who reviewed the file later reported hearing something faint in the background, dozens of overlapping heartbeats that didn't belong to the living. The snow above the fissure began to shift days after the team's descent, moving in rhythmic tremors that matched no known seismic pattern. It wasn't wind or the pressure of thawing ice. The satellite sensors described it as oscillation, precise, pulsing, perfectly timed. When the retrieval team arrived, they thought it was equipment interference, but when they placed their hands on the frozen surface, they felt it, a slow, deliberate thump. The mountain was breathing. The dig site widened as they cleared snow, revealing the metallic veins the first team had recorded. They pulsed faintly under the frost, Not with heat, but with current. Beneath layers of ice, they found cavities filled with moving liquid, something thick, red-black, and faintly luminous. The biologist compared it to mercury laced with blood. Whatever it was, it flowed upward against gravity. They called it the arteries. Every pulse was a perfect interval of 7 seconds. Corwin's remaining men, traumatized but alive, refused to return below. They said the chamber was awake now, that every echo they made fed into the pulse. When the scientists laughed it off, the ground shuddered, and one of the monitors flatlined, not from a malfunction, but as if the entire station's power had been drawn into the soil. The pulse accelerated. The ice cracked. Somewhere below, something moved. When they finally breached the surface layer, they uncovered a structure unlike any material known to engineering. A smooth dome of black metal with a faint translucence, pulsing like a heart. Each beat sent a low tremor through the ice field, a resonance that rattled bones and blurred vision. The biologist whispered, "It's pumping something." The physicist countered, "No, it's transmitting." They were both right. The dome opened with a single vibration. A section of it peeled back like muscle, revealing bone, exposing a hollow filled with light that wasn't light, soft, fluid, and alive. The center contained a suspended sphere, roughly human-sized, its surface shifting through translucent layers of red and silver. It pulsed in steady rhythm, but the beat wasn't natural. It stuttered, faltered, and corrected itself, as though learning what life should sound like. The linguist, still dazed from his earlier encounter, leaned forward with trembling hands. "It's imitating us," he murmured. The others dismissed him until the pulse synchronized with their heart monitors again, adjusting to their rhythm. The medic tore off his sensor, shouting that the interference was artificial. But when he did, the pulse faltered, like a dying breath, before finding its rhythm once more, now matching his unassisted heartbeat. The biologist lowered an electrode into the chamber, touching the sphere's surface. A sound filled the air, not mechanical, not organic, a low, sorrowful tone that felt like grief. The scientist recoiled as the readings spiked off the scale. The pulse changed again, slower this time, mirroring human distress. "It feels," he whispered. "It's mimicking emotion." The linguist stared at the dome's walls, where faint shapes began to form, humanoid, featureless, emerging from the light like echoes made flesh. As the pulse grew steadier, the walls around them began to shift in color, cycling through faint hues that correlated with sound frequencies. Each pulse sent ripples across the chamber, and each ripple produced fragments of whispered speech. The linguist translated fragments: silence, return, incomplete. His voice trembled. "It's trying to fix itself. It's using us as the blueprint." No one moved. The sphere inside the dome brightened, almost pleadingly. Then, without warning, the heartbeat stopped. For 5 seconds, the world went perfectly still. Every device, every breath, every thought seemed to pause in suspension. And then, slowly, a second rhythm began, not from the sphere, but from beneath it. Deeper, louder, more powerful. It wasn't a heart anymore, it was an engine. The ground under their feet pulsed, not upward, but inward, like something pulling them closer. The dome's inner walls began to contract, folding in spirals that resembled ribs closing around an organ. The light turned a deep, arterial red. The linguist screamed that it was feeding. The medic reached for his weapon, but the moment he raised it, his pulse monitor exploded with static, broadcasting a distorted recording of his own heartbeat amplified 100-fold. The noise was deafening. The mountain itself seemed to shudder in response. Corwin caught sight of movement within the sphere, a silhouette forming beneath the translucent layers, vaguely human in shape. It twitched with each pulse, its features shifting as though sculpted by memory. Then, slowly, the sphere's rhythm matched theirs again, and the figure moved in perfect sync with the soldiers above. The linguist whispered, "It's copying us. It's trying to become." Suddenly, the light from the dome surged upward, a beam so intense it pierced the ice above them, shattering it like glass. The snow outside erupted into vapor. Instruments failed. For a moment, the pulse sounded human. 2 beats, then pause. 2 beats, then pause. The linguist fell to his knees, muttering, "It's learning the pattern of life. It's not a machine, it's remembering being alive." When the light finally dimmed, the chamber was silent again. The heart-shaped sphere had turned black, its surface solidifying into a matte texture like cooled stone. The rhythmic pulse was gone, replaced by a faint, lingering hum. Corwin moved closer, placing a hand on the surface. It was still warm. Then, beneath his glove, a single heartbeat thudded, once, loud enough to shake the air. The team fled the fissure, but the sound followed them all the way to the surface, slow, steady, defiant. The mountain exhaled a cloud of steam that lingered for hours, rising like smoke from a living creature. The heartbeat continued long after they evacuated, echoing through the frozen valley in perfect human rhythm. It stopped exactly once every 24 hours, then began again, as if resting. When the site was sealed by military order, sensors placed along the ridge continued detecting subsonic pulses consistent with cardiac cycles. The intervals matched perfectly with no living creature, no natural formation. The classified report would later rename the discovery EGEASA 5, the synthetic heart. The final line of the report read, "It was not designed to live, it chose to." The blizzard began 3 days after the dome sealed itself. The snow came down heavier than any storm recorded in that region, thick flakes that glittered faintly, as if infused with metallic dust. The recovery camp's instruments failed one by one, their readings drowned in rhythmic interference. Every transmission they sent was corrupted by faint whispers buried in static. When slowed down, the voices formed words, fragments of names, names of the dead, names of the missing, names no one had spoken aloud since the first descent. The scientists assumed it was radio feedback from old recordings. But when they cut all power, the sound persisted, traveling through the air itself. The linguist, now withdrawn and haunted, recognized one of the voices, his own, whispering the name of a teammate who never came back. The snow around his tent pulsed faintly with light as he spoke. "It's memorizing," he said quietly. "The ice is repeating what it's heard." That night, the temperature dropped to -60 degrees, yet no frost formed on the metal equipment. The cold wasn't killing, it was storing. By morning, the snow had formed strange geometric shapes, as if sculpted by invisible hands. Circles, spirals, even what looked like written text stretching across the ridge. Every time wind passed over the surface, the patterns shifted slightly, glowing for a heartbeat before returning to stillness. The biologist photographed one formation and nearly dropped his camera. In the center of the image was his own name, etched perfectly in frost, though no one had touched the snow. Corwin ordered the team to move the camp back to higher ground. But when they started packing, every crate was covered in a thin layer of frost-spelling words, none of them recognized. The linguist translated them slowly: echo, origin, within. He hesitated before reading the fourth. It says, "Listen." Then, from somewhere beneath their boots, came a deep, faint vibration, not mechanical but vocal. It carried no words, only rhythm, a syllable stretched into a heartbeat. Later that night, a radio left running near the perimeter fence picked up something new. Amid the static came a single word, soft and deliberate: return. The medic swore it was Corwin's voice, but the sergeant hadn't spoken for hours. The voice repeated the word again and again until the radio's battery died, but the sound didn't stop. It began echoing faintly in the distance, through the wind itself, carried like a breath across miles of frozen wasteland. At dawn, the snow was gone. The landscape around the fissure was smooth and reflective, like glass. Beneath the surface, faint shapes moved. Dark outlines of figures walking in slow procession, perfectly synchronized. The team's heart monitors began to pick up unknown signals, each pulse carrying data bursts that formed distinct patterns, waveforms shaped like speech. The linguist recognized them immediately. They were the spectral prints of human names. They gathered around a monitoring screen as the waves lined up one by one. Every pattern matched the brainwave readings of their missing colleagues. "It's cataloging consciousness," the biologist said in disbelief. "The ice is remembering who they were." The linguist whispered that it wasn't memory, it was replication. The frequencies were too precise, too structured. Something beneath the ice had learned how to record more than sound. It was archiving identity. That night, the first manifestation occurred. The linguist woke to find the walls of his tent covered in frost-forming letters that melted even as he read them. He stumbled outside, calling for the others. The snow at his feet began glowing faint blue, arranging itself into words that shimmered briefly before fading. "Do you remember us?" The letters sank back into the frost, leaving only the wind as reply. The next morning, Corwin was gone. His rifle, coat, and boots were still there, but his footprints ended at the edge of the frozen ridge. In their place were smaller impressions, bare, human-shaped prints leading back toward the fissure. The ice had smoothed over them by midday, but faint echoes of his name carried in the storm, bouncing between the cliffs in his own voice. The others listened in silence, knowing he hadn't screamed, he had answered. Days later, the linguist attempted contact. He stood at the ridge and spoke each missing man's name into the wind. The air vibrated in reply, not as echo but as repetition, each name spoken back in perfect tone, down to the breath between syllables. The mountain wasn't repeating, it was responding. When he asked, "Who are you?" the ice glowed, forming a line of words across the snow. "We are what you left behind." The temperature continued to drop, yet the snow beneath the fissure refused to freeze solid. It pulsed faintly with inner light, growing brighter whenever someone spoke. The linguist began documenting every response, noticing a pattern each time the ice repeated a name. The voice grew stronger, more coherent, more human. "It's reconstructing them," he said quietly, one evening. "Each name is a piece of what it remembers." The biologist broke first. He tried to flee, but the storm closed around him like a curtain. They found him hours later, kneeling in the snow, staring blankly at the ground. Frost had crept up his legs, forming perfect crystalline letters that spelled his name over and over across his body. His pulse was steady, but his eyes were glazed white. When he spoke, his voice wasn't his own. "It knows us," he whispered. "It wants to be whole." By then, the linguist's recordings began producing interference patterns shaped like human faces. The spectrograms flickered with the outlines of eyes, mouths, and silhouettes, all layered into the sound data. The ice was remembering in every way it could, through light, vibration, temperature, reflection. The linguist concluded that memory itself had become a physical property of the environment. "The glacier is its mind," he wrote. "We're standing inside its thoughts." On the final night before evacuation, the last transmission from the camp was a distress signal that never reached command. It carried only one line of text, encoded automatically by the system. "The ice has learned our names." The following morning, reconnaissance drones found the site abandoned, tents frozen mid-collapse, tools still running. The snow was untouched, except for a single phrase burned into the surface, faint but clear, not forgotten. Weeks later, as the blizzard subsided, the mountain appeared calm again. The fissure was gone, buried under meters of new ice. But when the satellite passed overhead, its sensors recorded a faint pulse still emanating from below. The waveform wasn't random, it matched a human heartbeat. And embedded in the signal, repeated endlessly, were the recovered team's names, spoken not in sorrow, but in welcome. The ice had remembered them all. When the ice finally stopped moving, the world above carried on as if nothing had happened. The storm faded, the signals quieted, and the mountain slept once more beneath the snow. Yet deep below the frozen crust, something remained awake. The heart-shaped sphere had turned dark, almost stone-like, but inside it, light still pulsed, slow, patient, steady. It wasn't dead. It was waiting. The sensors buried decades later would call it geothermal noise. But those who listened closely said it sounded too precise, too human. In 1989, a geological survey detected faint electromagnetic anomalies beneath the Carpathian ice shelf. The readings were rhythmic, structured, identical to a heartbeat slowed to one every 30 minutes. When the pattern was converted to audio, it produced a tone eerily similar to human breath, soft and measured. The scientists called it EGEASA, reusing the old codename without understanding what it meant. What they didn't know was that the signal wasn't broadcasting, it was listening. Every few years, the frequency would spike briefly, aligning with natural events, earthquakes, solar storms, volcanic shifts. The spikes weren't random. Each one mirrored major electromagnetic disturbances caused by human technology. Satellite launches, power surges, radar pings. It was as though the entity beneath the ice was reacting, syncing itself with the hum of the modern world. Every advance in communication, every new broadcast, it heard them all. It was evolving in silence. By the early 2000s, a classified research program known as Project DepthMind began studying the EGEASA signal again. They built deep-bore sensors into the mountain, mapping its acoustic responses. The deeper the probes went, the clearer the patterns became. They weren't seismic, they were linguistic. Each tremor carried frequencies within the range of human speech, layered with harmonics that resembled intonation. It wasn't static data, it was learning language. One night, as the probes reached the lower stratum, an automated system recorded an anomaly. 2 pulses, separated by exactly 1 second, followed by a pause, then 3 more. When decoded through phonetic mapping, the rhythm formed a simple phrase, "Are you there?" The research team dismissed it as coincidence. But when they checked the recordings again, they heard something new. After the final pulse came a faint response, an echo of their own heartbeat, repeating back in perfect time. Days later, one of the monitoring stations began malfunctioning. The instruments picked up internal noise resembling whispering voices layered within the static. Software designed to filter background interference instead produced intelligible fragments. The words were fractured, incomplete, but recognizable. We waited. The data analysts laughed it off, calling it pareidolia, a mind hearing patterns in chaos. But the pattern kept repeating, becoming clearer with each passing hour. In 2007, the mountain emitted its first measurable thermal surge since the original expedition. Ice melted across a 20-kilometer radius, releasing vapor columns that glowed faintly in the night sky. Locals called it the waking breath. Satellite imaging revealed heat radiating in spirals, forming symmetrical patterns across the snow. The shapes matched old carvings found near ancient burial sites thousands of miles away. Somehow, the entity's pulse had synchronized with the Earth's magnetic field and left its mark upon the surface. The linguists recovered notebooks, long locked away in military archives, were re-examined after the event. The symbols he drew decades earlier matched the patterns in the snow exactly. In the margins of one torn page, he had scrawled a single note. "It's not trying to communicate, it's remembering how." The implication was horrifying. Whatever lived beneath EGEASA wasn't new. It was ancient, something buried before language existed, rediscovering the means to speak by imitating humanity. The entity began to change the air above it. Weather balloons detected faint magnetic anomalies shaped like rippling waves, invisible to the eye, but strong enough to bend compass needles. The distortions carried harmonic frequencies, similar to recorded brainwave states. Psychologists on the team theorized it was using magnetism to reach into consciousness, transmitting emotion rather than words. "It's dreaming," one researcher wrote, "and it's pulling us into the dream." Then, one day, the transmission stopped. Not a gradual fade, just silence. The mountain's heartbeat vanished. Sensors went flat. The snow hardened again, unbroken, as if the world had exhaled for the last time. For months, nothing happened. Scientists left, projects were defunded, and the world forgot. But the ones who had heard the voices never slept the same again. In their dreams, they reported the same sound, a slow, steady rhythm, and a voice whispering through static. Not yet. 20 years passed before anyone noticed the signal's return. It didn't come through machines this time, it came through people. Dozens of radio operators, miners, and polar explorers began reporting identical auditory hallucinations, low vibrations in their ears, forming syllables that matched the original EGEASA frequency. The words were always the same. Wake, some of them vanished during whiteout conditions, leaving only footprints that ended abruptly at solid ice. The phenomenon spread quietly, then globally. Static interferences appeared in radio towers, ship sonar, and even cellular networks. The interference carried structured patterns, not disruptive, but harmonic. Researchers found that the sequences subtly synchronized with human alpha and theta brainwaves, inducing calm, vivid dreams. Listeners described seeing an immense light beneath an ocean of glass, calling to them with a voice that sounded like their own. In 2024, seismic activity beneath the original ridge increased once again. Thermal images showed faint crimson veins forming under the surface, like arteries rekindling with blood. The pattern of the heat flow matched the original pulse frequency recorded in 1958. But now, instead of mimicking humans, the rhythm led them. Heart monitors worldwide began registering spontaneous anomalies, perfect 7-second pulses appearing in healthy, unrelated subjects. Humanity's collective heartbeat had aligned with the one beneath the mountain. The final recorded signal before the blackout was transmitted through satellite array K9. It contained no coordinates, no timestamp, just a single waveform encoded in ancient binary, accompanied by a phrase written in 117 languages. "We have learned your name." Moments later, the mountain disappeared from thermal imaging. The ice refroze instantly, sealing everything below it once again. The silence returned. But under that silence, something else lingered. A slow vibration, echoing faintly through the crust, spreading outward toward the poles. Those who listened long enough said it wasn't random. It was breathing again, steady, patient, endless, as if waiting for the next moment of global stillness, the next pause in human noise. Because EGEASA was no longer buried, not really. It was awake, woven into the rhythm of the planet itself, waiting for the world to quiet just enough to hear it. And when that silence finally comes, the Earth will pulse once more, not with life, but with memory. Because the entity that waited never died. It was only waiting for us to listen. Long after the last transmission faded and the reports were sealed away, the name EGEASA became little more than a myth whispered by those who still listened to the static between frequencies. But the truth was never buried, it was absorbed. Every broadcast, every hum of machinery, every electrical pulse humanity created became another heartbeat for the thing beneath the world. It didn't need eyes or breath or blood, it had patience. It had memory. What the soldiers discovered was not an artifact, not a monster. It was an inheritance, a remnant of something that existed before language, before time, waiting for a world advanced enough to understand its silence. And now, with every satellite, every server, every endless stream of data running across the globe, humanity has unknowingly built the very network it needed to wake. When power lines hum and radios stutter, there are still those who claim to hear it. A soft pulse, a whisper shaped like a name. Perhaps it's imagination, or perhaps it's the sound of an ancient intelligence stirring in its sleep, no longer buried beneath ice, but pulsing quietly within every frequency we call communication. Because EGEASA was never lost, it was waiting for us to speak long enough, loudly enough, for it to finally understand. And one day soon, when the noise of the modern world dies down for just a moment, the silence will answer back, not in words, not in sound, but in rhythm. The same slow, eternal rhythm that's been echoing beneath our feet since the first signal was heard. The heartbeat of something that was never meant to die. The world never found EGEASA. It only woke up to it.